My guest today, I've been working with for the better part of the last 10 years. She's been critical in helping me through traumas I've had from martial arts injuries, motorcycle accidents, hang gliding accidents, whatever abuses I've put my body through. She's been there to help me recover and get back to moving. And this is critical to our everyday life, even if we're not an athlete, even if you're not doing dumb stuff like I do to beat up my body, you can still get some benefit from this. Dr. Kate Kelly is not only an expert in this field and a specialist, she's a hardcore athlete herself, and she's learned the hard way over the years some critical things, crucial things that I think you'll benefit from. That's why I had her here, and let's get started. Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Dr. Kate Kelly. She owns Active Recovery Boston. Is it Active Recovery Boston Franklin or just Active Recovery?
Active Recovery Boston in Boston and Franklin. Yeah.
You've been treating me for years now for my injuries and problems and lack of paying attention to what we're going to talk about today. But I thought I'd have you on to discuss active recovery. Can you explain to everybody what active recovery is, what it means?
Sure. So I have a lot of experience with that term because that's kind of a philosophy we live by at Active Recovery Boston. And the company was formed because as an athlete, I was tired of my primary care physicians and other practitioners telling me just to stop when I was injured rather than do some active recovery. So the company was formed on how do we get people back from injury without having them just stop. Here's some active recovery suggestions, anywhere from self-care with foam rollers and balls to stretches and strengthening. But I think it's detrimental if people aren't involved in active recovery, both from after an injury, but also when their training load has gotten high and they need to move, but not tax the central nervous system.
I know that personally, one of the problems I have with my primary care physician is every time I go in there, he tells me he gives me the same speech. I can recite it by heart. The body's warranty runs out at 35 and you really shouldn't be doing anything after that. Which is crazy to me. That's insane. Our bodies are meant to move, not sit in a chair all day telling other people not to move.
Yeah. I hope you have run far away from that practitioner, please. Absolutely. And the thing is you can still have vitality in your 50s and 60s and 70s if you do it right.
Now, so what does the term mean to you? What do you define it as, active recovery?
Moving without stressing the body, but moving with trying to enhance circulation, improve or speed up recovery, and just move through. But
so if I'm an athlete doing intense exercise, what would a routine look like if it had active recovery included?
Right. So potentially not so jarring. So say you were a runner, it would be swimming, light swimming, or yoga, or maybe Tai Chi or Qigong, or maybe dance.
How about going for a walk?
Going for a hike, going for a walk, absolutely. A hike in the woods has great oxygen, which is great for recovery. So all of those kinds of things.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, let's see. I met you almost 20 years ago, I think, the first time that I met you. And back then you were even a hardcore athlete yourself, doing triathlons. Did you do marathons too, or just triathlons?
Triathlons, marathons, yeah. And
Did you do an Ironman?
No, half
It-
Ironman.
half Ironmans, half more than I would ever do. But,
I did other
um,
endurance, 10-hour endurance races. So I did do out
oh,
10
wow.
hours. Yeah, just not
Wow.
Ironman.
So knowing what you know now, did you train smart back then?
I did not train smart. I did not sleep as well as I should have. That's huge recovery after
Oh, good point.
massive
Yeah.
recovery. I did not eat well enough post
Yeah.
exercise. And I was really in what I call an adrenal state most of the time. So kind of running to the next thing, running to the next thing. I didn't mentally come down from being so on all the time, and I didn't physically. And that's just a huge drain on my system.
Yeah.
And to be perfectly frank, Randy, I think it had some kind of effect on conceiving children
Really?
later on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't mind sharing, but I had assisted IVF for my twin girls,
Okay.
and I honestly think that some of that wear and tear and poor recovery really and training had an effect on that system.
Yeah, because it's
So
very evident in and I'm not an expert on this, but it's very evident with female athletes when they overtrain, right? There are
yes,
clear signs that you're doing too
correct.
much.
Yeah. What I didn't understand then, what I understand now is how much the hormonal component plays into training. And that's not just like I'm describing with when I decided to bear children. It's actually your training changes with your cycle, and
Mm.
what your body needs in and around that is very different than men. And
Yep.
so, and this is still being uncovered, honestly, in research, that women need different things, and they need different things as they age and their hormones change. And men also need different things as their testosterone changes, et cetera, et cetera. And so I had no clue about hormones and how they affect performance, sleep, anxiety, any of that stuff when I was younger and training a lot.
I think that it was early this year. I saw one of the female athletes that was on the Nike team. She was a runner, fastest in the world in high school. And she
Mhm.
went to the Nike team, and they had there's a documentary about it, about the
Yep,
way the female athletes are being mistreated and
correct.
overtrained, and it's
Yep.
hurting their bodies and bone structure.
Yeah, I saw
Yeah.
that as well. Yeah. Yeah, and there needs to just be a different approach, which I think there's some researchers out there. Dr. Stacy Sims is a great researcher. She's doing a lot
Mhm.
with young women, middle-aged women, and then postmenopausal women, because those are kind of the three stages
Yeah.
of changes and transitions in women's bodies.
So you would definitely, what would you tell your younger self with what you know now, if you were your own coach from your training habits?
Mm-hmm. That now they have all these gizmos to track your sleep.
Yep.
I think that is probably one of the number one components of recovery. So I would have been a better sleeper. Um, I would have eaten more or better quality proteins.
Yep.
And probably listened to my body a little bit better when I had some aches and pains. You can sometimes 50% of the time get away with running through a mild injury when you're in your 20s.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't, but when you start to get into the 35s, and you got to be on it, and you got to be on it early if you
Yeah.
don't want to be taken out longer, right? And so having the ability mentally to say to myself, okay, now I'm not 19 or 25, I'm 35 and 40. My approach to injury and what I'm feeling has got to be different. I've got to adjust that, and I will agree with we are fighting age as we are trying to perform better, right?
Sure. Well,
So
that's true. That's true.
you can't deny that. So you have to make adjustments as you go. And those adjustments have to be in your recovery zone, in your eating and your sleep,
Which are hard, because
Right.
speaking from my own experience, it's been very challenging the last, I'd say, 3 to 4 years especially, it's like something just changed and it got harder to get away with stuff, and trying to increase my performance, or like you said, just keep going up, but at the same time other things are just compiling and stacking. And
Yeah. You can't put the same amount of load. Yeah, you can't put the same amount of load at the same intensity that you have been doing. You can certainly continue to get better and still have
right.
vitality, but you have to adjust some things. And I think from an ego perspective, as an athlete,
Yeah.
you have to say to yourself, it's very hard in your mind to say, you know what?
Yep.
I'm not 25, and I don't know if I can run that 5:30 mile anymore at 50.
Yeah.
You know, and give yourself a break. Like, that's really hard to do. If you can do that, you are a superstar. But realize mentally you're not that person, even though
Yeah.
we think we are, because we, you know.
Well, you're either going to do it and come to grips with it, or your body's going to come to grips with it before your mind and make you humble you into submission, basically.
There you go. Exactly. Right.
Now, and you were a few years ago, you were powerlifting too, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Now, did you see when you were powerlifting, did you see a lot of people making mistakes that you treat, or that you know now is like, oh, that's really shouldn't be doing that?
Yeah, I think when CrossFit first came out, for example, that was great business for me. And so I got into the mix of that to see what was going on in those gyms.
Right.
And of course, there's great gyms and not so great gyms. And people always have compensation going on in their bodies. Nobody is perfect. Nobody has exactly the same strength on the right as they do on the left, or exactly the same elasticity as they do on the right, right? So, and we are really good as humans and biomechanical humans to compensate.
Yeah.
And those little subtleties can be hidden, so much so that a coach in the gym isn't educated enough or doesn't have the viewing glasses to be able to see those compensations. Yeah. And they go on and on and on and on and start having bad biomechanical things going on, and then they get an injury, right? Yep. So in some cases, it's not the coach's fault because they just don't have the viewing glasses on the edge.
It'd be nice as a coach if we knew everything, but that's not the reality. We're a work in progress. It's not.
Sure. Right. Anyway.
A lot of the stuff that I point out to my students or my athletes are things that I learned the hard way myself, from bad experiences. And sometimes that's the only way we learn.
Right. Right. You know, and I think, Randy, you've gotten smart enough in the last few years. No, more than a few, 10.
Maybe.
You come in and you say, I've noticed a change in this particular movement pattern, and I can't figure out why, and I know it's going to lead me to injury. And that's exactly the insight you need when you start. But it takes you a while to understand that about your own body.
I think it's also just having feedback from a lot of people over the years. Unless you're doing something physical regularly, you lose touch with your body, where you can't feel those things. You can't feel those little nuances or something being out of whack. So you're completely oblivious that that's even going on.
Absolutely. You know, we call that body unaware. A patient is totally body unaware, and it's almost a neurological disconnect, like somebody cut the wires from the brain to the body. And this happens all the time. I said, you can't feel that you can't externally rotate that shoulder? They're like, I had no idea, right?
No, I have people that come in that their posture is like this from sitting at a desk forever, and you put them straight up. I talk about this in a video I shot last week. You put them straight up and they don't believe you. They think that they're leaning backwards now because the brain is actually adjusted to this forward posture. But I've seen kids that have come in as they've come into me as teenagers that never exercise their whole life, and they have no coordination. It's like almost like you're working with a toddler who's just getting their limbs for the first time, and they don't have any connection between mind and body. It's crazy.
100%. Yeah, they haven't developed that part of the brain. So it is like you're working with a toddler. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, Um, well, so some of what you said actually leads to a question that I had for you today. Was there's a common opinion or state of mind even that when we're young, we can get away with, when we're training, we can get away with a lot more intensity, or, the common thing that I hear a lot is when you're young, you just recover faster and you can bounce back, things like that. But I've also trained a lot of boxers and grapplers in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even some in their 70s that when they come in, they're wrestling with, no pun intended, they're wrestling with injuries that they got in high school or they got in college, and they were never the same after that. And I've also had athletes come in that they were high school athletes, and I've seen them go through shoulder trauma or knee trauma that they will never recover from. They're done. They can't even play that sport anymore. They're toast for life. So is that really the case, or is it that we get wiser as we get older? And I know the body recovers differently. That's not disputable. But I guess what I'm asking is, is active recovery just something for old people or old athletes, or is it something that people should be paying attention to at all ages?
Yeah. So I think people should be paying attention to it at all ages. Here's what happens. When an athlete has trauma, no matter what the age is, you have a disconnect in the musculoskeletal system, but also the brain has now implanted a trauma that is not forgotten. And so that individual so first thing is, the rehabilitation after that injury needed to be spot on, needed to be watched, and needed to be the correct recipe for that individual. And then that individual needed to continue to potentially do some movement patterns to get that body part moving the way it should. And that's the homework that needs to be done.
Right.
If that never happened and they skipped over that, you've now got years and years and years and years of this trauma, and the brain not recovering and not creating a new loop of the proper functional movement pattern. So you've got the brain barrier and you've got the musculoskeletal barrier where like the joint just won't move anymore, right?
Yeah.
And along with that comes atrophy and scar tissue and all that kind of stuff. And then you've got the brain trauma. So I'm working with a gentleman now. He was a pro hockey player, and he has a shoulder. He never has had an injury in his life, which I find ridiculous. But anyway, playing pro hockey.
He just got hit in the head so many times he can't remember them.
I mean, yeah, exactly. He's got all his teeth too. I couldn't believe it, right? So
wow.
He had an injury to his rotator cuff, and he's clear, like his joint moves and everything, but his brain, this is his first trauma, his brain is stopping him from moving it correctly because there's a guardedness. The central nervous system is still in this fight or flight.
Yeah.
And so we have to do some specific cueing for him to move through that barrier. Now we're also doing some cleaning up of scar tissue and some healing, but that's a case where he's had trauma and he's trying to reconnect neurologically to the brain how to move through it. And so that's what happens with kids. And the easy way out is to say, I can't do that anymore, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well,
and that's the easier way out, right? And so for some of the people who say, I just can't play my favorite sport, I mean, if they have an art, I don't know. I'm not privy to those people who are saying that. So I can't say from here, oh, it's the brain telling you that, but maybe it's a combo of the two.
It reminds me very much of, I've had 3 motorcycle accidents in my life. And what I was always told forever from the first one, if you don't get back on the bike right away, you're done. You won't.
Yeah.
The trauma seats, you'll always be afraid of it and you'll never go back. And the same in hang gliding. If you crash your hang glider and you have too much time off before you go back.
That's a really good example. Yep, exactly. That's
But
exactly.
I never thought of it with an injury in the body. I never thought about the brain trauma from that perspective. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and so active recovery is a great way to start getting those joints and the movement patterns to come back, like a Tai Chi or a
Qigong or
yeah,
like the
yoga.
stuff that we mentioned before, swimming, especially swimming, right? Because you don't have the impact of the gravity on the body as you're going through your exercise routine or range of motion. Is that accurate?
Correct. And then the other thing is to check is you always got to check the psyche. So check that ego at the door when you're recovering from something like that, and not feeling like I used to be able to ... or this shouldn't be so hard ...
That is hard. Like I said before, I mean, I've had to deal with that, and it's just it's a stubbornness. Like, I used to be able to do this. Why can't I do this now? Or I used to be able to train 6 days a week. Why can't I train 6 days a week or multiple times a day, 6 days a week? And but that's kind of, sorry, go ahead.
I consider this time of my life, and since you've been an athlete for, doing this for so long, it's all about adaptation at this point.
Yeah.
How are we adapting to the changes that our bodies are making, and how do we continue to have fun in our hobby or our sport and improve? So it's all about adaptation.
And you can either resist
Yep.
or you can go with it. And if you resist it, then you get broken more. I mean,
correct.
But I see, like, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, especially, because you go to a lot of places where the training, like, people will train really intense. And I've tried to coach my team to not train that way, even though people want that. Like, you think you got to go all out to be able to get something out of it. But I listened to George St. Pierre's trainer. I don't know if you know who he is, but George St. Pierre was a big UFC fighter. He was champion for years, but he has a trainer, Faris. I can't remember his last name, but he was talking about how if you train that intense, and because you train that intense, you get injured, and you can't train the next day, then let's say every other day you have to take a day off. At the end of the year, you only train 3 times a week, maybe 50 hours a week at best, if you account for maybe 2 weeks off, which usually illnesses, injuries, whatever. Mm-hmm. But if you take that 50 weeks at the end of the year, you trained 150 hours versus the athlete, no matter what age, that trained softer, smarter, and they're there 3 times a day, 6 days a week, because their body can now just it's recovering on a whole different level and a whole different platform. And that, when you do the math at the end of the year, they've trained, 6-10 times longer than you have. And I thought that was a really cool way of getting across. It sunk into my head.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like ultra marathoners. They'll split up their runs in one day. If they're supposed to do a 20-mile run, they'll do maybe 10 in the morning, have the active recovery or the recovery in between, and then do 10. It's still 24 hours. So the body is handling that load. And they're still putting the mileage in. Yeah. It's just the recovery in between, and that'll allow them to train until the end. So it's the same kind of theory. Yeah.
That's smart. I didn't know they were doing that, because I always remember hearing people were doing 100-mile runs, and I was like, that is crazy.
Well, that's once. Yeah, right. They don't do that in training. Yeah. Were they doing it in training?
No. I did have a student years ago that was training for that, and I don't recall, because it was like back in 2006. So it's a little bit distant from remembering how he was doing it. But it's intense. But well, I want to thank you very much for joining us today and answering some of these questions and helping to solve the mental process as far as training, how to keep us smarter and healthier.
Yeah,
and if we don't, then we have to come give you business.
Yeah. Right. Right.
and pay for your house and retirement, right?
Right.
We pay one way or another.
Yeah. There you
but
go.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.